Greetings, students! Welcome to this week's office hours. We received quite a large volume of questions this week, and I do wish that I had the time to address all of them. But I will be saving a few, and will be hoping to address a few I've missed in coming episodes. As you know, what we do here on Office Hours is attempt to demonstrate for you the ways of looking at the world. The conclusions are substantially less valuable than the journey. Our conclusions we hold with a very light hand. Our journey through we pursue with delight, vigor, and curiosity. Let's begin. Patreon subscriber Samuel McCandless asks, Professor, why are all of the characters in Winnie the Pooh based on mental illness? How do they know so much about the topic when the DSM had not yet been developed? Is the media we consume programming our personalities? Am I just a strange loop? A fine question, Samuel. I think your intuition here that the media is attempting to program your personality is correct, of course. Let us look deeper at this persistent notion, though, that the characters of Winnie the Pooh are based on mental illness. As you point out, the books precede the DSM by a couple of decades. Winnie the Pooh and his friends made their first appearances from 1924 to 1928, and the DSM-1 came out in 1952. However, there was another book, of course, which was used in a similar way. The ancestor of the DSM that would have been appropriate at the time was called the Statistical Manual for the Use of Institutions for the Insane. A considerably less catchy title. It had been released in 1917. But it does not seem to have been a reference point either. Even assuming that A.A. Milne, the creator of Winnie the Pooh, was on the forefront of psychological research and had obtained for himself a copy of the Statistical Manual for the Use of Institutions for the Insane in the first few years since its release, that book lacks many of the psychological ailments that have been attributed to the residents of the 100-acre wood. For example, neither ADHD nor reading disorder are listed in that manual. And so we must conclude that mental illness was not actually an organizing principle for Winnie the Pooh characters, no matter how much Eeyore may seem to exhibit the signs of depression, or Tigger might seem to be in a constant state of hypomania. So where did this idea come from, if not Milne himself? It appears to have been foisted onto the work by no less an authority than the Canadian Medical Association, Canada's premier professional body for doctors. The paper was published in 2000, and from there it leaked out to the wider fan community. The paper seeks to present itself as comedy. However, its jokey tone comes across as sinister to me. From the opening paragraph on the abstract, on the surface, it is an innocent world, but on closer examination by our group of experts, we find a forest where neurodevelopmental and psychosocial problems go unrecognized and untreated. Later, it claims that Eeyore the donkey has anhedonia, an inability to feel pleasure, but refers to it as anhehordonia, injecting a donkey's laugh into the psychological term. The vision of this paper, that doctors flood the children's space with their metrics and their clipboards, does not sit well with me, especially considering the timing of this paper. It came out in 2000, which was the crest of a wave of increasing drug prescription to children. According to the Psychiatric Times, there was a 5-fold increase in antipsychotics prescribed for youths between 1993 and 2002, and a 3-fold increase for antidepressants between 1997 and 2002. This enthusiasm for diagnosing children is reflected here in the glee that the writers take in diagnosing children's characters with serious mental illnesses. Could it be that this paper was actually intended as a softener, a preparation for parents to accept these mental illnesses to be foisted onto their children? Even more sinister is the fact that Disney Entertainment bought the franchise within months of this paper being published. Surely their PR department was powerful enough to have an influence over this paper, or at least its reception. Did they intend to exploit the link between Pooh and the overdiagnosis of children? What benefit could Disney possibly reap from the medicalization of child psychology? This is a question I leave to you, my students. I look forward to hearing your thoughts on it. Moving on, Patreon subscriber Dayman Woe asks a question which I will summarize here. He begins by invoking the point from the Max Headroom series regarding the virologist's enthusiasm for gene therapy, and suggesting that this form of control is also at play in the coronavirus vaccine. He then goes on to suggest the vaccine may have some effect on the expansion or contraction of psychic abilities within the next generation, citing both the American government's well-documented interest in psychic warfare and a rumor that the phenomenon of Indigo Children was the result of another governmental program gone haywire. I would first like to point out that the mRNA vaccine developed by Pfizer does not actually edit the recipient's genes, and so is not, in the sense explored in the Max Headroom series, or in the medical sense, gene therapy. I would also like to argue that the importance of new Coke to the structure of the Max Headroom analysis is central, a point which is swept aside in your question, Dayman. Humans are at the intersection of at least two types of structure that are capable of hosting life. The life of our species that is present in DNA and subject to the laws of evolution, and the life of our person that is present in our nerve and brain structures that is subject to the laws of psychology. Our DNA is composed of chemical information and our nerves of electrical information. DNA's most active role is in building and maintaining the body, while our neural system's most active role is in expressing the mind. It is the synthesis of these two life-bearing systems, and likely other, even less mapped systems, that form our interior world. Gene therapy, I think, is in its minor phase when we consider things like medicalized alteration of non-reproductive genes in adults. I believe this because the most important work of genetics is done during fetal development, and its second most important work is done during child development. Its ongoing role in adults is one of maintenance. But this does not mean it's unimportant. Genetics underlies all biological processing. It is a crucial factor in virology, cancers, and nutrition. This is what made me suspect that it may have something to do with preparing the body for hypnosis. It has a root to affecting mental activity via its control of digestion. But without that chemical agent, in my theory, it is new Coke. I don't see a path into the realm of psychic phenomena. That being said, I think that the link between the hypnosis aims identified in the Max Headroom series and the phenomenon of Indigo Children may be a good one. The research I have done on the Indigo Children claims that there is a class of children which the medical community describes as ADHD or ADD, and the New Age community describes as indigo. The disagreements come from affirmative points on each side, that the medical community encourages treatment with drugs like Ritalin or Adderall, and that the New Agers claim the children have psychic abilities like aura reading. What is left unexplored in this conflict is that both may be correct or both incorrect, and that the relationship between these drugs and psychic abilities may be more complicated or simply different than the presumption that the drugs suppress the abilities. You suggest, Dayman, in your question, that DMT may have a role in unlocking psychic abilities, and my intuition generally agrees. Deeply committed opinions on these issues, though, usually raise my suspicion. The cases are too varied for uniform treatment. But regarding the relationship between the Max Headroom Project and either expanded or suppressed psychic abilities, my opinion definitely falls into the latter camp. If you recall the 7th video in that series, my opinion is that the internet and social media have supplanted Max Headroom, and to great effect. The powers of these systems is generally to trap one in addictive loops of lower emotions, and not to expand one's consciousness or access to higher spheres. At least, that has been my experience. I must be very careful with my engagement so as not to get sucked into the whirlpool. Thank you for your question, Dayman. Your commitment to wisdom is evident, and I truly appreciate your insights. Our next question comes from Patreon subscriber Brennan Rutherford. Brennan, thank you for your question. He asks for our commentary on Operation High Jump, Rear Admiral Richard E. Byrd, and conspiracy theorist Mae Brussel. This has been a very popular topic that I have been asked to look into by several of our Patreon subscribers, and so I will share some observations here now, although usually I do prefer these things to be expressed in the form of a question, which makes it easier for me to plan out a plan of attack. In any case, here we go. Mae Brussel is one of the all-time great conspiracy theorists. Much of her work, from the descriptions of Admiral Byrd to her groundbreaking work on the JFK assassination, dealt with the ongoing Nazi threat after the end of World War II. Being a conspiratorial generalist myself, I have nothing but admiration for those who are able to go truly deep on a single topic. The woman created several filing cabinets full of information which were bequeathed to certain Santa Monica universities on her expiration, and I hope that I may leave behind such a legacy to Miskatonic when I go. Operation Paperclip is such a staple of the genre that I do not feel that I need to go into greater depth on it here, but if you haven't heard that phrase before, please do look it up. You're in for a late night of reading, certainly. According to Mrs. Brussel, Operation Paperclip was the mere tip of the iceberg in regards to the continuation of the Nazi threat. Her description of Operation High Jump, led by Admiral Byrd, is an excellent example of her work. The narrative she relates is that a naval war fleet was sent to the Antarctic in 1946 under the pretense of carrying out scientific experiments. There it fought, but did not eliminate Nazis who had established a new outpost in both the green and subterranean areas of that continent. She then goes on to link in a Jacques Vallée assertion that UFOs are coming from the South Pole to lead us to a very dark conclusion about that phenomenon. There are some other details of Rear Admiral Byrd's life which I find disconcerting. Despite Mae Brussel's theories, he seems to me too friendly with the Axis powers. Circa 1930, he accepted a decoration from the Mussolini-aligned King of Italy as an officer of the Order of Saints Maurice and Lazarus. The same medal was awarded to SS Obergruppenführer Hans Lammers, a member of Adolf Hitler's cabinet. I haven't even begun to delve into the meanings behind the presence of Saint Lazarus in this order, but I will note here that whenever the saint that came back from the dead is mentioned, my ears perk up. More suspicious activity I noticed from Admiral Byrd. As late as 1938, he was visiting Nazi Germany on friendly enough terms to be invited to the Nazi Antarctic expedition. Though he declined the invitation, his mere presence there on non-adversarial terms is a dark mark on his record. He was an active Mason and was raised to the degree of Master Mason in the First National Lodge in Washington, D.C. If these aren't illuminated bona fides, I don't know what are. What precisely he was doing in the Arctic is similarly up for debate. In the ancient Greek city of Delphi, there was a stone called the Omphalos. The story goes that Zeus set two eagles flying toward each other from opposite ends of the earth, and this is where they met, the very center of the world. The spot, known also as the Axis Mundi, was considered a divine site that was a link between the heavens and the earth. Because of its centrality, you see. Around the stone was built one of the most famous oracles of the ancient world, the Greek Oracle of Delphi. Could it be that the Rear Admiral Byrd's fixation on the polar axis mundi included a vision of it as a spiritual world center that had a special proximity to divine knowledge? This was certainly the conclusion of later deluded Nazis, including Miguel Serrano, who believed that Hitler survived and escaped to his base in Antarctica, where he was in touch with the ancient beings, and from which he would eventually emerge with a fleet of UFOs. There is much still to uncover about these topics, but at first blush, Byrd does not seem, to me, to be the heroic figure that his service record would indicate. Our next question comes from Echo Echo. Echo Echo, glad to have you back on the channel. I hold you in no way responsible for the exodus we suffered as a result of your last question, and am very excited to answer this current question of yours. Echo Echo asks, I have a question relating to some of the materials previously presented. In the Crash Test Dummy series, you talked about conjuring spirits down from the stars, and the Emoji series talks of seals and demons. However, in your discussion of the Max Headroom incident, you talk about the Illuminati as the result of abstraction, which seems to resemble a spirit of sorts. I was wondering, metaphysically speaking, do spirits quote-unquote exist as entities independent of human consciousness, or do you believe them to be the result of human consciousness? For instance, is the crooked god a literal being sealed behind the stars, or an egregore of human beliefs conjuring that being into reality? If either, what should the proper or ideal relationship with such spirits be? I appreciate the close attention you have brought to these explorations, Echo Echo. You have framed an extremely thorny question here. I would like to here insist on my position as a subjective observer. When I sit behind my desk, I sit as though I were behind my desk, but I make no claims as to the objective reality of the desk. In fact, I have good cause to believe that in most senses, my desk does not exist in a way that's meaningful. For example, at the atomic level, it is a seething mass of electrical strong and weak forces, while at the materials level, it is not really meaningfully different from the floor that it stands on. Similarly, when I identify the validity of certain occult notions in analyzing world events, I speak as though those were motivating factors. But I make no pretensions to speaking about the objective truth of the world. In our oft-quoted Gödel Escher Bach, Mr. Hofstadter undermines the very notion of human consciousness, which, to me, makes the validity of non-human consciousness an extraordinarily hard thing to even form an opinion about. I just have too much respect for my own limitations to stake out a definite position on the externality of what appear to be non-human intelligences. However, this same process might allow us to rejigger the entire system in order to get a working answer. If the very existence of oneself and all those around oneself is in doubt, we might say that the personalities of what appear to be spirits are no less real than humans, and thus avoid the whole dilemma. I think also, returning to the point of whether they exist only in human consciousness, even in the least enchanted view of these type of phenomenon, they may exist in dormancy outside of human awareness. If spirits may be communicated through information such as seals or the Videodrome signal, that information may persist despite a gap in human perception of it. The objects, the idols, may house the spirits. So too, there may be certain spirits implied by the very structure of the world, and others that may be particularly human and only implied by the structure of the human mind. They may be latent, animating forces, lying in wait for a medium in which to express, like the dead brain of the murderer on the workbench of Dr. Frankenstein. There is a Zen koan that has been reduced to a cliché that if a tree falls in the forest and no one is around to hear it, it does not make a sound. The paradox there for me is that if we are thinking of the tree, then we are perceiving it. Mentioning it conjures it. That being said, it is impossible to theorize about entities that do not exist within human consciousness. The act of theorizing them creates them. Nor can we claim even that, really, because we must assume that what we could theorize could be theorized by others. And so the guilt of creation is on the larger organism, the species, and we may confidently follow our thoughts without fear of spurning monsters into the universe. Or is there a certain responsibility that creative individuals especially have? And does it extend beyond the regular responsibility that we all have to our own mental health and ethics? These are problems that continue to trouble me. Regarding the proper relationship to such spirits, I tend to believe that kindness and love are always in order. Moving on. Ira Onark asks, Professor, if you were to meddle in the affairs of dragons, would you rather dance with Yahweh or Quetzalcoatl? Could weather modification be part of a ritual to lure or offend the Thunderbirds? Ira, it is always a pleasure having your questions on the channel. I love to research them, and they're always so inventive and well-phrased. Thank you very much. I was surprised to hear the Old Testament figure referred to as a dragon, but a quick Googling revealed the details of that exegesis. It is compelling in its own way, and gives a very strange sheen to the St. George myth that is worthy of deeper exploration elsewhere. However, the acknowledged close relationship that Quetzalcoatl has with rain, and moreover the extent to which weather modification research has occurred on his continent, makes him a more valuable point of reference for this question, I think. The Thunderbirds, of course, are distinct from these two. They generally were reported in the Pacific Northwest, and were experienced concurrently with thunderstorms. Whether they caused the storms, or were attracted to them, is unknown, and is, of course, the crux of your question. The media certainly goes out of its way to assure us that weather modification is impossible. However, it has still been a line of inquiry for the military and the world at large. Project Storm Fury was a military experiment lasting from 1962 to 1983 that attempted to understand how to control hurricanes. The findings were put to the test in Operation Popeye from 1967 to 1972, which attempted to increase rainfall in Vietnam and thereby disrupt the enemy's ability to carry out their plans. The international community took these projects seriously enough to outlaw the use of weather control for military purposes in the 1978 Environmental Modification Convention. However, in 1996, the Army released a paper entitled Weather as a Force Multiplier, Owning the Weather in 2025. This paper detailed the need for the United States to grow its capabilities for weather modification for just such purposes as were prohibited in the aforementioned convention. A couple things about that document caught my eye. First, and most ostentatiously, was this. The logo of the paper contained this peculiar glyph. The two spread wings with the eye in the central axis is certainly reminiscent to the resemblance of certain native depictions of the Thunderbird. But why should this outer space motif be featured so prominently on the logo of a paper about terrestrial weather modification? It seems to me that the answer to this lies in the paper's first appendix. Here they go into detail on the utility of the ionosphere, whose electrical fluctuations they refer to as quote-unquote space weather. Could the yet unmastered changes in electrical sky currents be thin code for the flapping of the Thunderbird's wings? Is it possible that the United States military is neither luring nor offending the Thunderbirds, but attempting to plug them into the grid? The way that the paper mentions this vital element and then goes on to say that they're sure we'll have it figured out by that time makes me wonder if some things which could not be in print had already been figured out. We are coming near the year marked in the paper for its conclusion. Perhaps 2025 will reveal what is really meant by these words. Perhaps the flood of global warming data might have something to do with these experiments which were begun in the 1950s. Time will tell.
Professor, though, listen.
Yes.
He asked you if you would rather dance with Yahweh or Quetzalcoatl, and you didn't answer that, actually.
I did answer that, actually. I said I would rather dance with Quetzalcoatl because Quetzalcoatl does rain.
Oh, did you really?
Well, I sort of sidelined it in there.
So, as long as you got that covered, I guess. Would you, though? Would you dance with him?
Well, I mean, I'm having to choose between two very dangerous partners.
Right, that they'd do more than just step on your feet in a waltz, wouldn't they?
Yeah, wouldn't want my foot to be stepped on by one of those.
No, a rain god stepping on your foot.
Sounds like a recipe for getting swept away, if you know what I mean.
Oh, I do.
I don't mean romantically.
No, I mean, I know what you mean, like physically swept away.
In a flood.
No, I get it. Right, okay.
Next question. Patreon subscriber Draven Dark Matter asks, here is my question. I've been seeing this new UFO footage people are talking about, and it feels like a big deal. But I have to go out of my way to find news and information about it. Are people just, not able to process this right now? Why isn't this louder news? Indeed. There is a paradox in attempting to research a question like this because, as you point out, Draven, the coverage is out there. The strange thing is that it doesn't seem to have been taken up by the algorithm in the same way that we might expect. It is, after all, an utterly sensational story that I would imagine could generate the sort of clicks that those websites thirst for. So what is going on? Is it possible that this is a wedge of suppression that social media is leveraging against traditional media? Is it possible that this is just a matter of particularly sophisticated bit of social engineering where wide panic is avoided by undermining the virality of this story, but plausible deniability is maintained by allowing news sources to cover it in the now discreet home pages of their websites? I feel a bit of a sense of the calm before the storm, and I, for one, look forward to seeing appear in the deeper recesses of the internet which are my purview the details of this ongoing disclosure. Kevin the Cardigan asks, I'm trying to verify what I can. I am a little confused about reaching the number 72 for your 72 face core emojis. Using Emojipedia and going back through the Unicode versions up to version 8, I can easily discern 70 of the 72 face emojis you presented. What confuses me is your inclusion of the Ogre and Goblin emojis from Unicode 6. They're not human faces, and there are other similar non-human face emojis that you could also have included, so why those two? Among them are, and then he lists Skull, Alien, Alien Monster, the 8 persons, the 10 animals, the 4 sun and moon faces, before concluding in the same line. I appreciate your diligence, Kevin, and wanted to address this publicly here instead of in the comment section on the emoji video. The intuitive grouping was likely corrupted by your use of Emojipedia. That website presents a series of additions to the raft of emojis, but does not show complete emoji sets for each generation. It does show the complete set for the current generation, but that is not particularly useful for us. You are able to find it if you use the Wayback Machine, and there you'll see that Goblin and Ogre are included along with the other 70 faces as the first 72 emojis in that set. Moreover, the Skull, Alien, and Alien Monster are all accounted for in the original emoji video that I created. They are part of the 3210 ending sequence that signifies the end of the emoji set of 72. That countdown begins with the 73rd emoji. Moreover, there are what seem to me good correspondences between Ogre and Goblin, and the goetic seals to which I have assigned them, Shax and Asmodeus. Goblin is a particularly strong visual resemblance to the seal of Shax, with his long nose being represented in the seal. Moreover, the lesser key tells us that Shax appears in a bird form. Emojipedia tells us that the Goblin emoji depicts a Tengu, which Wikipedia then states is in fact a legendary bird demon. Shax is well placed. Asmodeus's assignation to the Ogre likewise has several points of contact. The devilish appearance of the Ogre accords well with the devilish tail on the left-hand part of the Asmodee glyph, and I believe his furry mane to be important as well. The demon Asmodee, unlike many of the goetic characters, has quite a long and storied history. He appears in the biblical Book of Tobit as Asmodeus, as well as much associated folklore. In the Conte de Gabelais Discourse 4, Asmodeus is referred to as a hobgoblin, a close cousin to the ogre represented here. The most important details here, though, to me, are a thread which justifies his hairy beard. In his book, The Testament of Cyprian the Mage, Volume 2, a contemporary scholarly work on demonology, Jake Stratton Kent identifies Asmodeus as the demon king of the South, co-present with Amaimon. However, in Reginald Scott's 16th century The Discovery of Witchcraft, Scott notes that the rabbinical name for that position is Azazel. Azazel, who according to this thread of identifications is linked to Asmodeus and thereby Asmodee, is well known for his appearance in Leviticus as the recipient of a goat sacrifice. It is on this and other broader textual evidence that Peter Gray in Lucifer Princeps identifies Azazel as potentially being the chief of the Seirim, a class of demon that directly translates as the hairy ones, and in King James is translated as satyrs. Could it be that a hairy, devilish appearance was chosen for this particularly powerful demon as a result of his chieftain amongst the hairy ones, the Seirim? Perhaps. And so, while the mere numbering may be enough to suggest the inclusion of these two faces amongst the other 70, I believe the plethora of points of contact to be a compelling affirmation. Of course, this investigation is ongoing, and I welcome any counter-proposals. The final question that I'd like to address here today was proposed by Hader Momin, who asks, what difference is it gonna make by knowing the truth? Like I know knowledge means power, but by even knowing about these things, we can't change anything. I think this is an important question for us to think about, and, of course, different answers will be appropriate for different ones of us. For me, this brings us back to something that I was saying at the beginning of this episode, and that I consider to be of very high importance. We do not hold our conclusions with a tight fist. The value of these investigations is mostly in the doing. We are training ourselves to reject stories which are projected onto us, and there are many who seek to project stories onto us. There is much profit to be made there. It allows us to live more genuinely with ourselves if we are able to gain some control over those, if we question, if we build our own narratives out of the facts presented, instead of accepting the linkages shown to us. It is not a philosophy that should lead to wide agreement amongst us, but to lively and high-spirited debate. What I'm trying to say here is that it is not knowing the truth that is valuable, but searching for the truth. Illuminated masters can poison the stagnant waters of a tightly held belief, but poison in a moving river quickly gets flushed out. We must stay lively, and this will give us our vigilance. Thank you to everyone for joining us on this week's Office Hours. I hope to see you again in 2 weeks' time. Please like and subscribe and hit that alarm bell for notifications to join us during the live stream. If you'd like early access and occasional additional content, please join us over on the Patreon and follow us on Instagram and Twitter. I will mention that the Patreon subscribers are much more likely to get their questions answered, so if you have a pressing question, please do join us there. I have also cut out certain of my exchanges with Sheila during this episode, and I must say that those are some of the most delightful parts of this episode. So I hope that you will come over there and see that when it goes up sometime in the next week or two. Until then, may you bask in the sun of wisdom, just as do our reptile overlords.